Little Orphan guided the lost Apache girl home. The next day, 300 warriors filled the mountains on. A small desert town rested between dry hills and distant mountains that seemed to change color with the light. In the morning they looked pale and quiet, but in the evening they turned dark and mysterious. Most people in the town avoided looking at those mountains for too long. Old stories lived there, stories about danger and pride and tribes that moved silently across the land. Life in town was simple but hard. Dust covered everything, and people worked long hours just to survive. Among the busy streets lived a boy no one truly knew. He had no family name that people used. Some called him the Little Orphan. Others simply nodded at him without speaking. Years earlier, a wagon accident had taken his parents while traveling through the region. After that day, he learned to live alone. He slept wherever he could find shelter, sometimes behind a stable, sometimes near the bakery when the owner allowed it. He earned food by helping others. He carried water buckets, cleaned tools, and ran small errands without complaining. The boy spoke little, but he watched everything. He noticed how people treated each other, who was kind and who avoided eye contact. He understood quickly that kindness often came quietly, without attention. A baker might leave extra bread near the door without saying a word. A stable owner might allow him to rest near the horses during cold nights. These small acts kept him going. Despite the loneliness, he found peace outside town. There was a narrow trail leading toward the hills where fewer people traveled. The boy often walked there to collect firewood. He liked the silence of the desert, the way the wind moved through dry grass and carried distant sounds. Out there, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like part of something larger. One evening, as the sun lowered toward the horizon, the sky turned warm shades of orange and gold. The boy walked along the trail with a small rope tied around a bundle of sticks. His steps were slow but steady. The air felt calm, and for a moment he allowed himself to relax. Then he heard something unusual. At first it was faint, almost like the cry of a bird. He stopped and listened carefully. The sound came again, soft, broken, and human, a cry filled with fear. He dropped the bundle of wood and followed the sound, moving quietly through the rocks. He didn't rush. Life had taught him to be careful before approaching anything unknown. As he moved closer, he saw a small figure standing near a ridge, a girl. She looked younger than him. Her clothing was different from the town style, made from natural materials and decorated with patterns he had only seen from a distance when Apache traders passed through. Her hair was dark and tangled, and dust covered her face. She looked tired and scared, as if she had been walking for a long time without rest. When she noticed him, she stepped back quickly, her eyes wide with caution. The boy raised both hands slowly to show he meant no harm. He knew words might not help if she didn't understand his language. Instead, he moved carefully and kept his distance. He reached for the small canteen tied to his belt and gently held it out toward her. For a moment she hesitated, watching him closely. The wind moved softly between them, carrying the quiet sound of distant hills. Finally she stepped forward and took the canteen. She drank slowly, then lowered it, her shoulders relaxing slightly. They tried to speak, but their words didn't match. Still, they managed to communicate through gestures. She pointed toward the mountains and shook her head, then pointed at her feet, showing she had walked far. The boy understood enough. She was lost. Many people in town would have turned away. Helping someone from the mountains could bring trouble. Old fears still lived in people's hearts, shaped by years of misunderstanding. But the boy didn't think about that. He only saw another child who looked as alone as he felt most days. He nodded gently and pointed toward a narrow path leading deeper into the hills. He had explored parts of it before while gathering wood. If she had come from the mountains, maybe this path would guide her back. The girl studied him for a moment, then followed. They walked slowly together. The sky darkened, and cool air replaced the day's heat. The boy listened carefully to every sound around them. Sometimes the girl stumbled, and he waited patiently. Neither of them spoke much, but a quiet trust began to form between them. As they climbed higher, the land changed. The ground grew rockier, and small signs appeared that the boy barely noticed before. Stones placed in careful lines, broken branches positioned deliberately. He realized these might be markers used by people who knew the land deeply.
He stopped and pointed toward them.
The girl's face brightened with recognition. Relief filled her eyes, and she began moving faster, guiding the way now. The boy followed, feeling both nervous and hopeful. Soon faint smoke rose ahead, barely visible against the darkening sky. Before they reached it, shadows moved among the rocks. Figures appeared silently, their presence strong and calm. Apache warriors stepped forward, watching carefully. They didn't rush or speak loudly. Their stillness made the moment feel heavy with meaning. The boy froze, unsure what to do. The girl ran toward them, speaking quickly in her language. Her voice carried emotion, relief, excitement, perhaps gratitude. She pointed back at the boy again and again. The warriors turned their attention toward him. Their eyes studied him carefully, not with anger, but with caution. One stepped forward slowly. The boy felt his heart beat faster, but he stood still. He knew running would make things worse. A long moment passed. Then the warrior nodded once. Another approached and offered him water. The gesture felt simple, but important. The tension eased slightly. The girl smiled at him, no longer frightened, her earlier fear replaced with warmth. Though he didn't understand their words, he sensed he had done something right. After some time, one of the warriors gently guided him back toward the trail leading away from the camp. It seemed they wanted him to return safely to his own world. The girl watched him leave, placing her hand over her heart, before he turned away. The boy walked back alone under a sky filled with stars. He felt tired but strangely peaceful. He wondered if he would ever see her again. When he returned to town, everything was quiet. He found his usual place behind the stable and lay down, thinking about the mountains and the girl's smile. Sleep came quickly. Morning arrived like any other. People opened their shops, horses moved through the streets, and dust rose into the air. Then someone shouted. People turned toward the mountains. At first it looked like shadows shifting across the ridges. Then dust clouds appeared, growing larger with every moment. Riders, one by one they emerged from the hills, then dozens more behind them. The sound of hooves echoed across the valley. Fear spread quickly through town. Doors closed, voices whispered. Hundreds of warriors rode in organized lines, moving with calm strength. At the front rode the girl, and beside her was a tall leader whose eyes searched the town carefully. The orphan stood frozen in the street as the riders approached. He didn't know if he had brought danger or something entirely different. The warriors stopped at the edge of town. The entire town stood still as the riders stopped at the edge of the dusty road. The sound of hooves faded, leaving behind a heavy silence that felt almost unreal. People watched from behind windows and half-open doors, unsure whether to feel fear or curiosity. No one moved forward. No one spoke loudly. Even the wind seemed to slow down. The orphan boy remained where he stood, his heart beating fast. He had never seen so many warriors together. Their presence was strong but calm, not wild or chaotic. They sat straight on their horses, watching the town carefully. Their expressions were serious but not angry. At the front, the young Apache girl he had helped sat proudly beside a tall leader. Her face looked different now. The fear he had seen the night before had disappeared. She looked confident, safe, and surrounded by people who cared about her. When her eyes found him in the crowd, she smiled. The leader beside her noticed the direction of her gaze. His sharp eyes followed until they rested on the small orphan boy. For a long moment he studied him without speaking. People around the boy slowly stepped away, creating space as if unsure whether standing near him would bring trouble. The boy felt exposed but forced himself not to run. Something inside him told him that leaving would only make things worse. The leader raised one hand slowly. The warriors behind him stayed perfectly still. Then he guided his horse forward, moving toward the boy at a calm pace. Gasps rose from the crowd. The boy swallowed hard as the rider stopped only a few steps away. Up close, the leader looked older, with eyes that held both strength and wisdom. He looked down at the boy, not with anger, but with careful attention. The girl spoke quickly to the leader, her voice filled with emotion. She pointed toward the boy and then toward the mountains, telling the story in her own way. Even without understanding her words, the boy realized she was explaining how he had helped her return home. The leader listened quietly. After she finished, he nodded slowly. Then he dismounted from his horse, moving with steady confidence. The entire town watched in silence as he stepped closer to the boy. The boy felt small under the weight of so many eyes, but he stayed still. The leader placed one hand gently over his own heart, then gave a slight nod toward the boy. It felt like a sign of respect. The boy hesitated for a moment before copying the gesture, unsure if it was correct, but wanting to show understanding. A soft murmur moved through the crowd. The girl smiled wider, clearly pleased. Another warrior brought something forward, a small wrapped bundle. The leader accepted it and carefully handed it to the boy. The boy looked at it in confusion but accepted it politely. Inside were simple items: dried food, a small carved charm, and a cloth with patterns that felt meaningful even if he didn't understand their exact meaning. The gesture surprised him. He hadn't expected anything in return. Around them, the townspeople began whispering. Some looked relieved, realizing the warriors had not come with anger. Others still looked nervous, unsure what would happen next. The leader turned toward the town, speaking briefly in a calm voice. Few understood the language, but the tone sounded peaceful. After he finished, an older trader who had once traveled through Apache lands stepped forward cautiously. He tried to translate using simple words. "They say they come to give thanks," the trader explained slowly. "The girl is important to them. They searched for her all night. The boy helped her return safely." The crowd shifted uneasily, surprised by the news. The girl moved her horse closer to the boy and leaned forward slightly, her eyes shining with gratitude. She spoke softly, though he couldn't understand the words. Still, her tone felt warm and sincere. She pointed toward him, then toward the mountains, as if promising he would always be remembered. The boy felt heat rise to his face. He wasn't used to attention. Most days people barely noticed him. Now everyone watched him as if he had done something great. Time seemed to slow as the tension faded. The warriors remained calm, their presence strong but peaceful. Some townspeople slowly stepped outside, curiosity overcoming fear. Children peeked from behind their parents, watching the horses with wide eyes. The leader spoke again to the translator, who nodded and turned toward the town. "They wish to trade," the translator said, as a sign of peace. The words surprised many. Trade meant cooperation, not conflict. Slowly, the mood shifted from fear to cautious interest. A few shop owners stepped forward, offering goods carefully. The warriors responded respectfully, showing patience. Throughout it all, the leader occasionally glanced toward the orphan boy, as if acknowledging him without drawing too much attention. The boy felt unsure what to do with himself. He stood quietly, holding the small bundle he had been given. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, not as a burden or an outsider, but as someone who mattered. The girl eventually dismounted and walked toward him. She stood close, smiling gently. Though they couldn't speak the same language, she pointed at herself and said her name slowly. The boy repeated it carefully. She laughed softly, encouraging him. Then she pointed at him, waiting. He hesitated before giving the simple name people used for him. She repeated it with effort, clearly determined to remember. The moment felt simple but meaningful. Around them, trade and conversation continued. The tension that had filled the town earlier faded into something calmer. People realized the arrival of the warriors was not a threat, but a message. As the sun moved higher in the sky, the leader returned to his horse. One by one, the warriors prepared to leave. Before mounting fully, he looked at the boy once more and gave another small nod of respect. The girl lingered a moment longer. She placed a small feather charm into the boy's hand, closing his fingers around it gently. Her expression turned serious, as if she wanted him to understand that the gesture carried meaning beyond simple thanks. Then she returned to her horse. The riders turned toward the mountains. Dust rose again as they moved away, disappearing slowly into the distance. The town remained silent long after they were gone. People looked at the boy differently now. Some smiled at him for the first time. Others nodded with quiet respect. The baker called him over and handed him fresh bread without asking for work in return. The boy walked slowly through the street, feeling both proud and confused. Nothing about him had changed, yet everything felt different. As evening approached, he climbed the familiar hill outside town and sat quietly, holding the feather charm. The mountains looked peaceful again, but now they felt less distant. The days after the warriors left were quiet, but the small orphan boy could not stop thinking about the girl and the mountains. He returned to his usual routine, carrying water, helping in stables, and sweeping streets. Life in town felt ordinary, even dull, after the excitement of that day. But something had changed. People looked at him differently now. A few of the townsfolk nodded at him with respect. Some smiled. Others whispered. For the first time he felt that he belonged, at least a little, in a town that had once ignored him. Despite the town's calm, the boy found himself drawn to the ridge outside the town, the place where he had first heard the girl crying. The sky stretched wide above him, the sun warm on his skin, and the wind carried soft whispers through the dry grass. He climbed slowly, remembering how the girl had followed him, trusting a stranger to help her. That memory filled him with a quiet pride, and also with a longing. He wanted to know how she had returned to her people, how the mountains looked now that they were safe. One afternoon, as he sat collecting firewood, he heard the familiar sound of horses in the distance. He froze, hope and fear mixing in his chest. The sound grew closer, the ground shaking lightly beneath hooves. Dust rose into the air, swirling in the late afternoon sun. The boy's heart raced. Could it be the warriors returning? His mind imagined both possibilities, danger or reunion. Then, from the ridge, the girl appeared. She rode confidently, flanked by a few warriors, but not in the way she had been before. This time she rode with purpose. The boy watched, unable to look away as she approached the town. Her eyes met his, and she waved. He waved back, almost unable to believe that he would see her again so soon. The townspeople had noticed the dust clouds forming over the ridge. Children ran to doors and windows, and adults whispered nervously. Some grabbed tools or sticks, unsure what to expect. Yet the warriors did not come with weapons raised. They rode calmly, in order, their movements precise and disciplined. The girl led them to the central square. The boy followed behind, unsure if he should speak or stay silent. When the girl stopped, she dismounted and walked to him. Her hair fell in neat strands over her shoulders, and her eyes shone with determination and warmth. She gestured for him to follow. The boy obeyed, stepping carefully between the horses and the crowd that had formed. He noticed the warrior leader standing behind her, observing the town and the boy with sharp, intelligent eyes. She led him to a small clearing near the center of town. The warriors formed a circle around them, respectful but firm. The girl pointed toward the town, then toward the mountains, and finally toward the boy. Her expression was serious, yet filled with gratitude. Though he could not understand her words, he felt the meaning. He had helped her return home, and now she had returned to honor that moment. The leader stepped forward. His gaze scanned the boy carefully, but there was no anger in his eyes. Instead, he seemed to study him, understanding the courage it had taken to help the girl. He spoke in a firm but gentle voice, and the girl repeated the words slowly so the boy could understand. "This boy helped one of our own," she said. "He guided her through the mountains when she was lost. We honor him for his bravery and kindness," the crowd murmured. The townspeople began to understand. The arrival of the warriors was not a threat, but a gesture of respect. The girl's words spread quickly, and soon everyone in the square was watching with new understanding. The boy stood quietly, holding his small bundle of firewood in his hands, unsure if he deserved the attention he was receiving. One warrior stepped forward and handed him a small token. It was a carved piece of wood, smooth and shaped like a feather. The boy took it carefully, turning it in his hands. The girl smiled at him, her eyes bright. She tapped his shoulder gently, a gesture that made him feel connected to her, and to something larger than the town, something beyond the mountains. The girl spoke again, pointing toward the mountains and then to the boy. She was telling him that he would always be remembered among her people. Though he did not fully understand, he felt the weight and warmth of her message. It was not just gratitude. It was a promise, a recognition that his small actions had mattered in a big way. As the sun moved lower in the sky, the leader signaled for the warriors to depart. But before they mounted their horses, he approached the boy and knelt slightly, bringing himself closer to the boy's level. The boy's heart thumped as he met the leader's gaze. With a small nod, the leader acknowledged the boy's courage, showing respect and trust. The boy returned the gesture, copying what he had learned from the first encounter. The girl stepped closer and handed him another small item. This one was a piece of cloth with intricate patterns, symbols that held meaning among her people. She touched his hand gently, ensuring he understood that the gift was not only for him, but also a symbol of connection and trust. The boy accepted it, feeling a warmth spread through him. The townspeople watched silently, some with awe, others with curiosity. They had never seen anything like this before. An entire group of warriors coming not to fight, but to honor a small boy who had acted with kindness. The mood shifted from fear to admiration. The mood shifted from fear to admiration. Even the children peeking from behind doorways felt inspired by the courage of someone so small making such a difference. After a final nod from the leader and one last smile from the girl, the warriors began to move away. Dust rose again as they made their way back to the mountains. The boy watched them disappear into the distance, the feather and cloth still in his hands. The quiet of the town returned, but it was a different quiet now. The air seemed lighter, the streets calmer. People began to speak to each other, sharing the story and expressing surprise at the bravery they had witnessed. The girl turned once more, waving to the boy before disappearing among the riders. He waved back, feeling a sense of closure and connection. Though they spoke different languages and came from different worlds, their bond was clear. It was a bond built on trust, courage, and kindness. That evening the boy returned to his usual place behind the stable. He held the feather and cloth close, thinking about the events of the day. He felt proud but also thoughtful. Life in the town would continue, with its work and routines, but he now knew that even small actions could create ripples far beyond what anyone expected. The night settled over the town, and the boy looked toward the mountains. He wondered what the girl was doing now, safe among her people, and whether he would see her again someday. For the first time he felt a connection to something larger than himself, a reminder that even someone small and overlooked could make a difference in the world. The moon rose slowly, casting silver light over the rooftops and streets. The boy held the feather in his hand, turning it over and over as he thought about courage, kindness, and the bonds that tie people together across distances and differences. He felt a quiet confidence, knowing that he had acted rightly and that the girl and her people would remember him. As he drifted into sleep that night, he imagined the mountains glowing under the rising sun, the girl smiling and the warriors riding in perfect formation. The world felt bigger now, filled with possibility and respect, all because a little orphan had shown courage and compassion when it mattered most. The days following the return of the warriors were calm, yet the small orphan boy felt a new energy inside him. Life in town returned to its usual rhythm. Shops opened early, the smell of fresh bread floated through the streets, and the stable rang with the clatter of hooves and the low calls of the horses. But the boy moved differently now. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, a subtle awareness that his actions had made a difference. People watched him differently, too. Some nodded respectfully when he passed, and a few children tried to follow him in hope of learning from him. The boy often returned to the hill outside town where he had first heard the girl's cries. The ridge overlooked the mountains, stretching far into the horizon, their jagged peaks catching the sunlight. Sitting there, he could see the vast land that had seemed so mysterious before, now familiar in memory but still filled with wonder. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of earth and grass. And for the first time he felt a connection to the mountains, the girl, and the people who lived there. One morning, as the boy collected firewood along the edge of the ridge, he heard the distant sound of hooves. He froze, heart beating fast. Dust rose faintly in the distance, but this time it was different. He recognized the rhythm of the horses. It was steady, organized, and deliberate. Could it be them again? His mind raced with possibilities, both exciting and frightening. As the dust clouds grew closer, the boy saw the familiar sight of warriors riding with purpose. Leading them was the young girl, mounted proudly on her horse. She was no longer the frightened child he had found days before. Now she sat tall and steady, her eyes scanning the town with careful focus. Her presence alone commanded attention, and the boy felt a mix of pride and awe. The townspeople noticed the riders immediately. Children ran to doors and windows, pressing close to see, while adults whispered nervously. Some grabbed tools, unsure if the visitors were friends or foes. Yet the warriors rode calmly, their discipline evident in each movement. Their formation was neat and precise, showing strength and coordination without any hint of chaos. The girl guided them to the town square, where the boy followed carefully. He kept a slight distance, unsure whether to step forward or stay behind. The townspeople parted quietly, allowing the riders room to pass. The boy's pulse quickened as he approached the center of the square. The girl had brought them here with intention. This was not a random visit. There was a message in her arrival. When she stopped, she dismounted and walked toward the boy. He could see the seriousness in her eyes, yet there was warmth and recognition in her smile. She gestured for him to follow, and he stepped forward cautiously. Around them, the warriors formed a respectful circle, silent but alert. Their presence was firm but non-threatening. The girl spoke softly, pointing toward the mountains, then at herself, and finally at the boy. Her gestures were clear. She was showing that he had helped her when she was lost, and that his actions mattered greatly. Though he could not understand her words, he felt the meaning through her tone, her gestures, and the intensity of her gaze. A warrior stepped forward and handed the boy a small bundle wrapped carefully in cloth. Inside were dried fruits, a carved charm, and a small piece of cloth with patterns meaningful to her people. The boy accepted the gift politely, turning it over in his hands. He had never received such a personal gesture before, and it filled him with a mix of surprise, pride, and gratitude. The leader of the group, the tall warrior who had observed him so closely before, stepped forward. He looked at the boy intently, his eyes assessing courage and character. Then he bent slightly and placed a hand over his heart, a gesture of respect. The boy mirrored it, learning from the first encounter, and felt a surge of belonging he had never known before. The townspeople watched in awe. They had never seen such respect shown to someone so young and seemingly insignificant. They whispered among themselves, amazed that a small boy could earn the honor of an entire group of warriors. The girl's courage and determination, combined with the boy's kindness, had created something powerful, a bridge between two worlds. The girl leaned close to the boy and placed another small item in his hands, a carved feather, delicate and smooth yet strong. She pressed it gently into his palm, her eyes serious but warm. The boy understood this was more than a gift. It was a symbol of trust, of memory, of connection. He held it carefully, feeling the weight of its significance. The warriors prepared to leave. The boy watched them mount their horses, dust rising beneath their hooves once again. The girl paused for a moment, waving at him. He waved back, feeling a sense of connection that transcended language and distance. Though she was returning to her people, he knew that their bond would endure. As the riders disappeared into the horizon, the town slowly exhaled. Children who had pressed against windows and doors relaxed, and adults shared quiet words of amazement. The mood shifted from fear to admiration. People began to speak about the boy's courage and the girl's bravery. Even the smallest acts, they realized, could carry great weight when performed with kindness and care. That evening, the boy returned to his usual place behind the stable. He held the feather and the patterned cloth close, feeling a warmth and pride he had never known. He thought about the girl, safe among her people, and the warriors, disciplined and strong. His thoughts traveled to the mountains, now peaceful and full of life, and he felt a deep sense of connection to the larger world beyond the town. He sat quietly, watching the sun set over the rooftops, painting the streets in gold and red. The wind carried the soft scent of dust and grass, and he felt a calm he had never known before. Even though he was small and had lived much of his life alone, he now understood that courage and kindness could change the world around him. He closed his eyes and imagined the mountains under the rising sun, the girls smiling proudly and the warriors riding in formation, their presence a testament to strength, honor, and respect. The boy felt proud to have played a part in their story, knowing that his small actions had mattered greatly. As the night settled over the town, the boy drifted into sleep, dreaming of mountains, horses, and the friendship that had crossed distance, language, and culture. He had learned that even the smallest acts of kindness could create bonds that lasted far longer than one day, and that courage often came in quiet, unnoticed ways. When the town awoke the next morning, the boy felt different. He walked through the streets with a light step, noticing the nods of respect, the smiles, and the quiet acknowledgments from people who had once ignored him. He understood, now more than ever, that being kind and brave, even in small ways, could bring honor and friendship across any distance. And somewhere, far in the mountains, the girl and her people would remember him, just as he would always remember the mountains, the dust, the riders, and the bond that had begun with a simple act of help and trust. The days after the girl and the warriors had returned to the mountains were filled with quiet reflection for the small orphan boy. Life in town continued as usual. Shops opened early. The smell of bread drifted through the streets, and the stable rang with the sound of horses being led and brushed. Yet for the boy, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Everything seemed more meaningful, more alive. The people who once ignored him now noticed him. Some nodded respectfully as he passed. Some smiled. Even strangers looked at him with curiosity. The boy had become more than the little orphan in their eyes. He had become someone who had done something important. He still carried the feather and the patterned cloth the girl had given him. They were small and simple, yet they reminded him every day of courage, trust, and friendship. He kept them in a safe place near the stable where he slept. Every time he looked at them, he remembered the girl's smile, her bravery, and the disciplined riders that had appeared like shadows from the mountains. He thought about the mountains themselves, their jagged peaks, hidden paths, and the way the wind moved over them. For the first time, the mountains did not feel frightening. They felt like a place full of life and stories. One morning as he walked along the trail to collect firewood, he noticed new tracks in the dust. They were not his own, nor those of the townspeople. He knelt and studied them carefully. They were fresh, hoofprints from horses moving in order. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be them again? He didn't know what to expect, but he felt both excitement and calm. He had learned that courage was not about knowing what would happen next. It was about standing quietly and doing the right thing when it mattered. By late afternoon, a distant cloud of dust appeared over the ridge. He climbed slowly to get a better view. From the horizon, he could see dozens of riders moving steadily, perfectly aligned. Leading them was the girl. She had grown taller in his memory, her posture confident and commanding. The boy realized she was no longer the frightened child he had found lost in the hills. She had become a symbol of strength and careful leadership among her people. The riders entered the town calmly, forming a pattern that showed discipline and precision. The townspeople rushed to windows and doorways, whispering and pointing, unsure of what to expect. Children peered from behind fences, their eyes wide with awe. Adults whispered to each other, some tense, some curious. The boy walked slowly toward the central square, carrying a small bundle of firewood. He didn't know what would happen, but he knew he could not turn away. When they reached the square, the girl dismounted and walked directly toward him. She smiled warmly, her eyes bright with recognition. He felt a strange mix of pride and nervousness. She gestured for him to come closer, and he stepped carefully between the horses and the gathering crowd. The warriors formed a circle around them, silent, alert, and respectful. The boy felt the weight of their presence, yet there was no fear, only attention and calm observation. The girl spoke softly, pointing toward the mountains herself, and then the boy. Though he could not understand her words, the meaning was clear. She was telling him that his kindness had mattered, that he had guided her home, and that the act would not be forgotten. The boy felt warmth spread through him. He had never imagined that his small actions could carry so much weight. The leader of the warriors stepped forward. His eyes scanned the boy carefully, measuring his character, his courage, and his presence. Then he bent slightly and placed a hand over his heart. The boy mirrored the gesture, remembering the first time they had met, feeling a surge of pride and respect. The townspeople watched silently, sensing the significance of the moment. Even children who had never paid attention to him now looked on with awe. One of the warriors brought forward a small bundle and handed it to the boy. Inside were simple gifts: dried fruit, a small charm carved from wood, and a piece of cloth with meaningful patterns. The boy accepted the bundle carefully. Each item felt heavy with significance, teaching him that even small, thoughtful gestures could carry respect, honor, and friendship. The girl came closer, placing another item in his hand, a small carved feather, smooth and delicate yet strong. She pressed it into his palm gently, showing him the importance of the gesture. The boy understood immediately. It was more than a gift. It was a symbol of trust, recognition, and the bond they shared. He held it close, feeling its weight as a reminder of courage, kindness, and connection across distance and language. The warriors began to prepare for their departure. The boy watched them mount their horses, dust rising around their hooves. The girl paused for a moment, waving at him before following the others. He waved back, feeling a strong sense of connection, even though they spoke different languages. He knew their bond would last, no matter the distance. As the riders disappeared into the horizon, the town slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Children peeked from windows, whispering and giggling. Adults began to speak to each other, sharing the story they had witnessed. They talked of courage, of kindness, and of the little orphan boy who had guided a lost child through the mountains. Respect and admiration filled the air, replacing the fear and confusion that had existed before the warriors arrived. That night, the boy returned to his usual spot behind the stable. He sat quietly, holding the feather and patterned cloth close. The warm glow of the evening sun lit the rooftops and streets, and a gentle wind blew across the town. He thought about the mountains, the girl, and the disciplined warriors who had arrived to honor him. He felt proud, but also reflective. He understood now that even small, unnoticed acts could carry great importance and touch lives in ways he had never imagined. He thought about the girl, now safe among her people, and the mountains, once frightening but now full of life, order, and respect. The boy understood that courage was quiet, often unnoticed by most, but capable of creating lasting bonds and recognition. The mountains and the girl had taught him lessons that no one in the town had been able to teach. As darkness fell, the boy lay down under the stars. He imagined the mountains glowing under the morning sun, the girl riding proudly among her people, and the disciplined warriors moving with strength and precision. He felt a sense of peace, pride, and understanding. He had learned that acts of kindness, bravery, and trust could cross distances, languages, and worlds, creating bonds that lasted far longer than a single day. Sleep came slowly, but it was filled with dreams of mountains, riders, horses, and friendship. The boy held the feather close, feeling its smooth surface and its meaning deep in his heart. He understood that his life had changed, and he would never be the same. The mountains were no longer distant and frightening. The girl's people were no longer strangers. He had become part of a story that would be remembered, a story of courage, guidance, and respect that connected him to a wider world. The next morning when the town awoke, the boy walked through the streets with a light step. People nodded at him with new understanding and respect. Children followed him quietly, curious to learn from someone who had shown true courage. Even strangers in town paused to look at him differently, sensing that he had been part of something extraordinary. He walked to the ridge outside the town holding the feather in his hand. The mountains rose in the distance, majestic and calm. He thought of the girl, the warriors, and the acts of courage and kindness that had created bonds stronger than fear or misunderstanding. He realized that life was full of opportunities to help, to guide, and to act with bravery, no matter how small or unnoticed. And as he looked at the mountains, the boy understood one final truth. Even someone small and alone could make a difference that echoed far beyond their own world. Even the simplest act of helping another could create connections that lasted forever. He smiled softly, knowing that the girl and her people would always remember him, just as he would remember the mountains, the dust, the riders, and the courage that had brought them together. The sun rose over the town, casting long shadows across the streets, and the boy felt ready for whatever came next. The mountains stood proud in the distance, a reminder of the lessons he had learned, the bonds he had formed, and the strength that comes from kindness, courage, and trust. In that moment, he knew that his small life had touched something greater than himself, and he would carry that knowledge with him always.